New animated intro. Yeah, buddy. Welcome back to Lizard of Doom. I am Max. In this video, I'm going to be turning a Gundam into a Nurgle Daemon prince. See, I have done some not really kit bashing before. I turned Gundams into Riptides in 2 previous videos, but this time I wanted to get a little bit more tactile with it and actually kit bash something and mix it up a little bit more. This is the guy that I'll be using for this kit bash. He already looks quite a lot like a Plague Marine with those big shoulder spikes and the shape of his helmet. This is in fact the MS-07B Goof? I haven't watched the show myself, so if you know how to pronounce this, let me know in the comments. He's got loads of different options down here, but I thought that the sword would be the most suitable for a 40k thing. The whip does look cool, but I'll be using that for something else in a bit. To start kit bashing, I would have to tear him apart again, but Gundam models are all push fit, so you can easily pop it apart. I will be gluing it together in the future in this project just to make sure it's still and make sure everything holds together while I'm painting it. The arm is where I'll be starting. I need a big gun because this is 40k, so this one from the Forge Fiend will be perfect for this project. These guns are fantastic for kit bashing. I took apart the forearm because I'd need to somehow slot it together with this gun. I thought I'm going to need to trim that forearm down a little bit, and then I'll need to cut a hole in the top of the gun to slot them together. So I did this by whacking out the Dremel and cutting a square hole in the top of the gun, and then when that was done I pinned it for good measure as well, just to make sure it stayed. But after I attached it, I forgot to film what it actually looks like, so you're going to have to wait just a little second to see that. This used to be a plague drone. As you can see, it has been harvested for parts. I've taken its face, its legs and its wings. It is nothing but a shell of what it was. We will be starting with this other arm and some of the bits from that plague drone. I will need to get the sword back out of its hands. This will be so I can work on the sword itself and make that look a little bit nurgly as well. The handle will be going about halfway and the join will hopefully be hidden in his fist, so you won't see where this connects to the handle I'm going to fit it to, which is a piece of a plague drone leg. It is knobbly and bobbly and disgusting looking and will work well as a Nurgle handle. I also pinned some bits to the side. This is going to be the end of the plague drone's legs, this little talony bits on those mandibles, and this will make it look like a crossguard. There we go, that looks a little bit more like a medieval themed 40k sword, and very Nurgly. Now to the main body and head. That eye is actually a sticker, so that will have to come off so I can paint it. This was a little bit tricky, but I got there in the end. And the first thing I did was glue a Nurgle logo to his chest. This was from an old tank kit and I had slightly bent it to meet the shape of his chest very nicely. With his mark on his chest, it was time to add a big, disgusting, droopy flesh mouth protruding from that helmet. And I sculpted this nose from the plague drone perfectly to fit within that opening. Adding the wings just below the backpack, make it look like these have sprouted from his armour, and we're heading towards Nurgle Daemon now. This little bit on top of his helmet needs to get out of there, because it will be replaced with another one of those mandible ends to make it look horrific, chaotic, and Nurgly, but also still give a little nod to the Gundam that he is. And that is all the kit bashed elements done, so now to do some battle damage and wear and tear. This was a bunch of simple little bits of drilling, not going too far into the miniature, just making little divots to make it look like it had rotted away, and doing bits of scratching with the other Dremel tool. Then after that I cleaned them up with a scalpel just by scraping the excess bits of plastic off, and they were perfect. After this was the base. I wanted to glue it in place so I could see it all as one piece. I would start with the same size base as a Riptide and use these ceiling pieces from an old GW kit I'd cut to shape. But this wasn't quite how I wanted it to look. You see this area here, I wanted it to be like a goo pool or something, like a Nurgly grim pool that was leaking onto this and it was melting into the pool. So how was I going to make this piece of plastic look like it was melting? I had an idea. Don't worry, safety commenters, I did this outside with a mask on, well ventilated. Do not come at me. I washed this off and brought it back inside, and it was perfect. Nice, melty, gooey looking, eroded flooring for this Gundam to stand on. Now this base is a little bit big for a Demon Prince, but it fits the model, so that's what I'm going to do. Rule of cool. The next step was to put some PVA glue on the base, and then I glued down some cork bits to make large chunks of gravel for what would have been underneath this floor before it started to melt. Then I would sand in between, just to cover those gaps, and then put a little bit more PVA glue on when that had dried and create kind of these berms on the other side, these banks, so the goo would rock up against that and not overflow the base. Now to something I covered briefly last week that I said I'd cover more in this video, Tamiya epoxy putty. I was going to use this to sculpt all the gross gribbly Nurgle bits on top of this Gundam. This is the quick type. You get about an hour's working time after mixing it, and I find that to be more than enough. You get about this much for £10. You can see how much I've used during this project. I've used almost half of it. So it's not as cheap as green stuff, but it is so much better. You still need to keep your fingers wet to work with it, as it is as tacky as green stuff, but it's everything you wish it was. It goes on nice, it smooths out better than green stuff. It is just perfect. The method I used to sculpt these fleshy bits on the Gundam was to use fat sausages and poke them into place with a silicone tipped tool. After that you end up with this gross kind of overlapping flesh sag, which is a lot of Nurgly words. And I also did some bits on the shoulder pads to make it look like those horns were bursting through from underneath. Going back to this whip piece from the kit originally, I was going to use this as cabling. This would tie in nicely with the Gundam itself, as there's some of this cabling on the side, and connect those empty ports on the gun there to the rest of the miniature. I even did a nice broken one to make it look a bit dilapidated. But yeah, I think this worked fantastically well and tied it all together as one big gross fleshy gun arm that was wired into the suit. My next technique was to make these round pustules and boils. This will give it a more diseased, gross, Nurgly look, and I made a bunch of different size ones out of the Tamiya epoxy. I then poked round holes and sunk them in a little bit to make them look like they were more part of the miniature. But still big, round, gross, oozing pustules. Now comes a technique that I also used last week on that rat that I turned into an Easter bunny. I'm going to be using some wet wipes and PVA glue to create a cape. But before that, if you are enjoying this video, consider subscribing and tickle my little like button. It genuinely would really help me out if you would do that. Thank you. I cut sections of dried out wet wipe and ripped them to make them look tattered and gross. But this left me with a bit of a problem. Look how fluffy those bits look. That is not how I want it. So I brought out my old friend Fire and just slightly singed it. You've got to be careful because wet wipe does catch very well when it's dry, but it was a really easy, quick way of tidying up this fluff. I then got a little bit adventurous. I wanted to see if it worked to make like little holes in it to make it look like this cloth had worn even more, and you can do it by just catching a little bit there, but then you have to lick your fingers and put it out quickly or it will spread quite fast. Yeah, it works. Nice little holes. Be careful with fire, everyone. After that, I soaked it in PVA glue and pushed it into place, making a nice hooded robe with some tattered bits hanging down the front and a big section down his back. Robes and hoods are very 40k, and they're also quite Death Guard as well. A lot of them have a hood and like maybe a tabard or a cloak, but this would work well on the miniature. I cleaned up the glue afterwards from the plastic where it had kind of spilled onto there, and it looked very nice. What do you think? Do you think this is worth using as a technique to make cloth rather than sculpting it yourself? It is very easy. The next day, when all of it was dry, I used a car primer, a cheap spray from Halfords that's like a rusty red colour to prime it, but ran out midway. I thought I could get away with just using the end of a can, but that didn't happen. So then I had to go over the top of that with a black rattle can, a matte black rattle can, and it did something interesting to the shadows with that rusty colour in the depth and the black over the top. It kind of look quite nice. And this is what the priming situation looks like. I think it will be fine. It'll work for a Nurgle miniature. On something else I might worry, but this will be good to go. I used these 3 paints to build up the colour on the armour to a kind of brighter than Death Guardy green, but I knew I was going to be bringing it back down afterwards. I sponged this on to keep the dark recesses with this weird shading between that dark reddy brown and the black, and built up to the high highlights on just the edges. Very, very green, but quite a nice colour. I might use these colours more often. I do enjoy this bright green, and I'm doing an orc project on my Patreon. These silvers will be all of the functional metal, and the brass will be all of the display metal, the fancy bits. I gave it a base coat of the dark silver over all of these functional areas, and then sponged on the highlights, again keeping the same kind of texture as the armour. With the main painting of the armour and the metal done, I wanted to experiment now. I try a lot of new things on this channel, and this is all kind of my learning process that I show to you here. I want to use Dirty Down Rust effect as if it was streaking grime, because it is water soluble. Now that means you don't have to mess around with all those noxious chemicals to take it back off. Don't have to use spirits. Is this going to work? I don't know. The experiment begins with Dirty Down Standard Rust. I painted this all over all of these sections. This is a really trust the process moment when you've spent this long kit bashing something and then base coating it, and then you do this to it. You can see it kind of reacting as I put it on and going lighter oranges and patching all over. But when it's nearly dry, you can see it's still wet on the base there. It looked like this. This is one rusty turd, and it was a little bit daunting at this point, and this is a moment where you think, have I just ruined everything I've worked on? The way I'd take it off would be to use the same technique I'd use on something like streaking grime. A wet cotton bud, but this wasn't wet with solvents or anything, just water. I wanted to see if this worked. Does it stay in the recesses? Does it work like streaking grime? Can we just use this to make a rusty, dirty miniature, rather than messing around with all those noxious chemicals? And the answer is, categorically, yes. This works fantastically. If I can get it in focus here. There we go. Look at him. All defined, all rusty, all gross. Now this stuff will continue to develop into its final colours as it dries. It's still a little bit wet at the moment, but it works. Whenever you get water on this stuff, it does change the effects slightly, so that's something to bear in mind. But look at this. Let me know if you think you're going to have a go at this in the future. I definitely will be using this again. I did the same with the verdigris effect from Dirty Down on all of the brass as well, just to give it the same weathered, horrible feel. The fleshy goo bits needed a bit of attention now, so I based them with Screamer Pink and then went up mixing Bugman's Glow with that Screamer Pink until I reached just Bugman's Glow. This was going to give a nice bruised, horrible, flabby feel to the flesh all over this Gundam, and the couple of Nurglings I'd put on his base too. I also used some purple glaze from 2 thin coats in the crevices just to give it some shadow, before moving on to the bone and other bits with a Steel Legion drab base coat. This was to coat the things like the wings, the carapace around that, the sword handle, and all the teeth and bits and bobs all over the miniature. After this, while that dried, I moved on to these 2 contrast paints. The yellow one was for the boils, just putting it over that pink to make sure they still looked fleshy, but pustulous and disgusting. The red was for little bits like guts on the Nurgling down here, just to bring them out and make them not look like they're just flesh, putting bits of this glazed all over and around them. When the Steel Legion drab was dry, I gave everything an Agrax Earthshade coat. This was very thick, but then I dry brushed it back up with Steel Legion drab to the original colour. And then after that with Tyrant Skull. This is a dry brush paint, so perfect for this job. To give those wings a little bit more of a gross feel, I used the green that was from the highlight stage of the armour and thinned it down. This was to make a glaze. I needed some separation between the wings and the bits of carapace at the top of the wings, so this was going to give the actual fly wing bit a nice gross yucky green feel, and tie in a little bit more with the armour as well. Keeping a consistent colour across a model can really set it all together. I spread it out over the wings and made sure it didn't pool and tidied it back up after it was done. When that was drying, I dry brushed some grey on the base down here just to catch all those rocks, but leaving it quite black in the bits in between. I then dry brushed a nice light stone colour over the top just to catch all the edges. Before moving on to the cape, I based in Rhinox hide brown and dry brushed up with some nice reddy brown colours to reach this level of gross material. The texture from the wet wipe really gives a nice feel to this material. I don't think I could have sculpted this with the Tamiya epoxy or green stuff. I'm going to use this for all material from now on. I then added some white reinforcement to the areas I was going to add a glow to with the neon paint, and then highlighted them very carefully with a mix of the neon paints that went down and also a little bit of white just to catch the edges there. After this, I made the plasma effect by putting white in the recesses of the gun. This is how you do plasma. It should be hotter in the middle. It should not be on the top edges of the plasma. This is where you get the glow effect. And then I brought back a classic Yoo-hoo glue just to do the gross gribbly bits on the end of this gun here, and I did a few on the gross nose mouth as well. This bit here was meant to be like a slime pool. We discussed it earlier, and I was going to do this by using a little bit of puddle effect and then mixing that hopefully with the neon green that I'd done the glow effect with. This was a good idea at the time. I thought this might work, but it did not. The neon green mixed in too thoroughly. I even added more of the puddle effect, but when it dried, it just looked like green plastic. Because this didn't work, I went over it a couple of times with puddle effect, like put some on, let it dry, put some on, let it dry, and it looks okay. It looks fine. It looks like a pool of dirty greenish water now, so that'll do. That is better than what it looked like before. I put a few little grass tufts on there as well, and I'm calling it done. Do you want to have a look at it? Let's have a look at it. But before we do, one last remember to subscribe. So thank you to my Patreons. You can see them on screen now. If you would like to join and help me support this nonsense I do, you can join in the top corner now or in the link down in the description below. I am going to be doing a giveaway with this guy. I'm going to give this to someone who will appreciate it more than me. You have to comment, "Give me that juicy boy," and be a subscriber, and then you will get a chance to win this beautiful thing. I will pick someone at random from the comment section below when we hit 15,000 subscribers. So get subscribing and commenting, and hopefully we can get this to someone who will love it and cherish it. I think this is one of the best things I have ever made on the channel, and you could own it and have it in your home and use it in games if you'd like to, or just have a nice little look at it. So yes, I am giving this away. I make a lot of cool things on the channel and I can't keep them all. My space is limited. So I would like to give this to someone who would appreciate it. I'm going to do that when we hit 15,000 subscribers. We're tickling 12 now, so I don't think 15 is an unreasonable to do this giveaway. If I said 20, that would be a nice stretch, but it's a bit of a leap. So I'm going to say 15. So make sure you are a subscriber and you've commented, "Give me that juicy boy," and I will post him anywhere in the world. No sponsor on this week's video, as you may have seen, so check out my affiliate links down below. FIRESTORM Games, where you can buy Gundams and other models like this, as well as Warhammer and painting supplies, is where I get all of my supplies from and everything you see in my videos. And also the CREALITY one if you're interested in 3D printing or laser cutting. If you buy stuff through those links, a little bit comes back to me, but make sure you accept them cookies or it won't work. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Remember to leave a like for the like throne and a comment for the algorithm god. It is not a pile of shame, it is a pile of future fun. See you next time. Peace.